Have you ever wondered what it felt like to wake up in a world where death moved silently from village to village, long before anyone understood what it was or how it travelled? Picture a narrow medieval street before sunrise. The air is cool and heavy with wood smoke drifting from low chimneys. Straw lies scattered across damp cobblestones. Somewhere in the distance a bell rings slowly, its sound stretching across the morning fog like a warning carried on the wind. You stand in a century that has no microscopes, no antibiotics, no understanding of bacteria or fleas or rats. Only rumours, prayers, and the quiet knowledge that something invisible is moving through the world. What shaped this moment in human history? What forces turned ordinary towns into places of sudden silence? Why did entire families vanish within days, leaving doors swinging open in the wind? And how did anyone manage to survive in a time when the future itself felt uncertain from one sunrise to the next? If this story helps you relax, maybe consider subscribing. But only if it feels right. And if you happen to still be awake for a moment, tell me where you're listening from. I read those comments like tiny stars on a map, each one marking another quiet traveller somewhere in the world. Take a slow breath in and let it fall away. Feel the quiet around you settle, the way night settles over a medieval countryside once the fires burn low and the roads fall empty. Make yourself comfortable wherever you are and allow the edges of the day to soften. Now let's drift backward, back past the noise of the modern world, past cities and machines, past centuries of invention and change, until you arrive in the 14th century, a time when Europe stood on the edge of one of the strangest and most devastating events in human history. And strangely enough, a time when ordinary people still woke up, baked bread, tended animals, fell in love, worried about tomorrow, and somehow kept living. Tonight, you will walk quietly through their world. If you follow the long road stretching across Europe, you begin to notice something important. Carts loaded with grain creak along ancient routes. Merchants carry spices, cloth, metal tools, and stories from distant lands. Ships glide across the Mediterranean and Black Sea, linking cities that feel impossibly far apart. What no one realizes yet is that these same roads and ships are quietly preparing the path for something else to travel with them. Imagine standing beside one of these medieval roads. It is not the smooth highway you might expect today. Instead, it is a rough ribbon of packed dirt winding through forests, fields, and rolling hills. In some places it narrows into little more than a muddy track. In others it widens where wagons have worn the ground flat over generations. Travel is slow here. A merchant caravan might move only a few miles in an entire day, yet these roads form the veins of an entire continent. Along them travel grain from fertile farmland, salt from coastal regions, iron tools from distant forges, silk and spices carried across thousands of miles from Asia. The 14th century is more connected than many people imagine. Trade routes stretch across Europe, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Historians sometimes call this network the Silk Road, though in truth it is a complex web of paths linking countless communities. Goods pass from one merchant to another, sometimes crossing continents without any single traveller making the entire journey. Along the way, markets bloom like temporary cities. You might arrive in one of these bustling places just as the sun reaches its highest point in the sky. Voices rise in dozens of accents. Cloth merchants unfurl bright fabrics across wooden stalls. Farmers display baskets of onions, beans, and grain. Blacksmiths hammer glowing metal while children weave between carts and animals. It feels lively, hopeful, human. But trade carries more than objects. It carries movement. And movement means opportunity for tiny hitchhikers. Rodents thrive in these environments, rats especially. They slip easily between cargo crates, hide in sacks of grain, and nest in the wooden beams of ships. For the rats, trade routes are a paradise. Endless food, endless travel, endless places to explore. Inside their fur live fleas, and inside some of those fleas lives a bacterium that has already shaped human history many times before. Yersinia pestis, the organism responsible for plague. But here's the strange part. At this moment in history, no one has any idea bacteria even exist. The concept of microscopic life will not emerge clearly until centuries later. So the world continues moving with calm confidence. Ships sail, caravans roll across dusty roads, markets fill with laughter and bargaining. Yet woven invisibly through these systems of trade is the perfect transportation network for disease. The same connections that allow ideas, culture, and goods to spread across continents also allow something else to travel quietly between cities, something patient, something ancient, and something that will soon transform the lives of millions. Long before the plague reaches Europe, strange stories begin drifting westward along merchant routes. Travellers speak in hushed voices about cities where people fall ill suddenly and die within days. Some describe swollen bodies and darkened skin. Others insist entire communities vanished almost overnight. But in the 14th century, news moves slowly, and rumours often feel like distant storms that may never arrive. You hear these stories first in markets. A traveller pauses beside a well and speaks quietly to a group of merchants. He describes towns far to the east, where sickness spreads like fire through dry grass. People develop fevers, their bodies swell in painful ways, and within a few days, many are gone. The listeners exchange uncertain glances. Stories like this are not entirely unusual. The medieval world is full of tales carried along dusty roads. Some turn out to be exaggerated, others fade away as travellers move on. So at first, these rumours drift across Europe almost like background noise. But the details are unsettling. Some say the sickness began in distant grasslands where trade caravans crossed Central Asia. Others claim entire trading posts along the Silk Road fell silent. One story describes a city where so many people died that the streets were left empty except for animals wandering freely. And yet, these accounts remain distant, almost abstract. The people hearing them have crops to harvest, animals to care for, families to support. It is difficult to imagine that a strange illness thousands of miles away might someday arrive at your own doorstep. Think about that for a moment. Human psychology tends to place danger at a distance. Storms happen somewhere else. Wars belong to other regions. Disease belongs to other towns. Until suddenly, it doesn't. Meanwhile, historians studying this period believe the plague bacterium was already spreading widely through rodent populations across Central Asia. Environmental changes, climate shifts, and expanding trade networks likely helped the disease move from one region to another. Once infected fleas began travelling with merchant caravans and cargo shipments, the bacterium slowly expanded its reach. But this process unfolds quietly, without announcement, without warning. Years pass while the invisible wave moves westward, and during those years ordinary life continues almost exactly as before. Villages celebrate weddings, farmers plant crops, markets fill with voices and music. The rumours from the east remain just that. Rumours, until one day ships begin arriving at Mediterranean ports carrying something far more real than stories. and the quiet distance between rumour and reality begins to collapse. Somewhere in the grasslands of Central Asia, a bacterium known today as Yersinia pestis quietly begins its journey. It lives inside fleas, which in turn live on small animals like rats. None of this is visible to the people of the time. To them the world is guided by divine will, seasonal winds, and the unpredictable moods of nature. Yet hidden in the fur of travelling rodents, something microscopic has already begun crossing continents. If you could shrink yourself smaller than a grain of sand, you might witness the true beginning of the Black Death. Not in a palace, not in a crowded city, but inside the digestive system of a flea. Fleas survive by feeding on blood. They attach themselves to animals, piercing skin with tiny mouthparts designed perfectly for this task. Most of the time, this arrangement causes little trouble, but occasionally a flea bites an infected animal carrying Yersinia pestis. Once inside the flea's gut, the bacterium multiplies rapidly. Over time, it forms a thick blockage that prevents the flea from swallowing blood normally. This has a strange consequence. The flea becomes extremely hungry. Each time it bites a new host, it attempts to drink blood. But the blockage prevents proper feeding, so the flea repeatedly bites again and again. And with each bite, infected material is pushed back into the wound. From a biological perspective, this is a remarkably efficient system for spreading disease. But of course, no one living in the 14th century has any idea this microscopic drama is unfolding. To them, animals behave as animals always have. Rats scurry through grain stores, mice dart between walls, fleas itch. Nothing seems unusual. Yet behind the scenes, a chain reaction has begun. Rodents carrying infected fleas move naturally through ecosystems. When one population dies, fleas jump to new hosts. Sometimes those hosts are other animals. Sometimes they are humans. The trade networks of the medieval world accelerate this process dramatically. Ships transport rats between ports. Wagons carry them from town to town. Sacks of grain become temporary homes for entire colonies. Every new location offers fresh opportunities for fleas to find hosts. The bacterium spreads quietly, following patterns shaped by ecology, climate, and human behavior. In many ways, the plague is not intentionally attacking humanity. It is simply exploiting opportunities created by interconnected environments. Still, the effect on human societies will soon be profound. Because once Yersinia pestis reaches dense urban populations filled with people, animals, and limited sanitation, the stage is set for one of history's most devastating epidemics, and the people living through it will have no idea what invisible force has entered their world. In the early days, the sickness appears almost ordinary. Someone develops a fever. Another person complains of exhaustion and aching limbs. But soon something far stranger follows. Painful swellings appear in the groin or under the arms. These swellings, called buboes today, grow large and dark. For people living in the 14th century, it feels like the body itself has turned against them. At first, nothing about the illness seems especially unusual. Fevers happen often in medieval life. People fall ill during winter. They suffer from infections, injuries, and the many diseases that circulate in a world without modern medicine. A few days of weakness is simply part of living. So when the first person in a town begins to feel unwell, it draws little attention. You might notice someone resting longer than usual after working in the fields. A neighbour complains of headaches or chills. Perhaps a merchant arriving from another city looks pale and tired. It seems like the sort of sickness that passes with time. But then the symptoms deepen. The fever grows hotter. The exhaustion becomes overwhelming, as though the body itself has suddenly lost its strength. Even lifting a cup of water begins to feel difficult. Soon something more unsettling appears. Painful lumps begin to form beneath the skin. You might see them first in the groin, under the arms, or along the neck. These swellings are the body's lymph nodes reacting to infection. In modern medicine they are called buboes, which is why this form of plague is known as bubonic plague. To the people living through it, however, the swellings look terrifying and unnatural. They grow rapidly, they darken in colour, and they cause intense pain. Some become as large as small eggs or even apples. When touched, they throb with heat. The person suffering from them often drifts in and out of consciousness, fever blazing through the body like an internal fire. And the most frightening part is how quickly everything happens. A healthy person might feel fine in the morning. By evening they are feverish. Within a few days, they may already be dying. Without antibiotics, the human immune system faces the infection alone. Sometimes it succeeds, often it does not. Historians estimate that bubonic plague killed a large percentage of those infected, though survival was not impossible. But from the perspective of people watching their neighbours collapse so suddenly, the illness feels unstoppable. You might imagine walking through a village street where doors remain closed longer than usual. Inside one house someone is sick, inside another. 2 people. The illness moves quietly from home to home, carried by fleas that jump from rats to humans or through other pathways that no one yet understands. And because the cause remains invisible, the fear begins to grow even faster than the disease itself. People search for meaning in the strange swellings and sudden fevers. Some believe the body is poisoned by bad air, others suspect divine punishment. But standing here in this moment, watching the first strange illness spread through the town, one truth becomes painfully clear. Something new has arrived, and no one yet knows how to stop it. Even before the plague fully takes hold, fear begins its own quiet journey through villages and towns. People notice how quickly neighbours fall ill. Entire households become silent within days. Priests struggle to perform last rites for the growing number of dead. The human mind searches desperately for explanations, but none of the familiar answers seem to make sense. Fear moves in ways that are difficult to measure. It travels through whispers, through worried glances exchanged across market stalls, through the sudden quiet that falls over conversations when someone mentions sickness in a nearby village. You might notice the first signs while standing in a crowded marketplace. Usually the air here is full of sound, merchants shouting prices, children laughing, animals shifting impatiently in their pens. But now something feels slightly different. People are speaking more softly. They lean closer together when exchanging news, and certain stories repeat again and again. Someone's cousin in another town has died suddenly. A traveller says an entire household fell ill overnight. A priest mentions conducting more funerals than usual. At first these stories seem disconnected, but gradually they begin to form a pattern. More people are getting sick, and they are dying quickly. Human beings are naturally skilled at detecting danger, even when the full cause is unclear. The mind searches constantly for patterns that might explain what is happening, but during the early stages of the Black Death, the pattern refuses to reveal itself clearly. One family falls ill while their neighbours remain healthy. A distant town suffers greatly, while another nearby seems untouched. The randomness deepens the fear, because if the disease followed obvious rules, perhaps it could be avoided. Instead, it feels unpredictable, invisible, and deeply mysterious. People begin altering their behaviour in subtle ways. Some avoid crowded gatherings, Others stay inside their homes more often. Travellers arriving from certain regions are greeted with suspicion, yet life cannot simply stop. Fields still require tending, animals still require care, markets still provide food. So people continue their routines, though with an uneasy awareness that something is wrong. Meanwhile, the sound of church bells begins to change. Bells ring often in medieval towns, marking hours of prayer and celebration. But now they ring more frequently for funerals. Each slow toll drifts across rooftops like a reminder that the world is shifting. Think about what it must feel like to live through this uncertainty. You wake each morning unsure whether the illness will appear in your household next. You watch neighbours carefully for signs of fever. You listen for news travelling along the road. And because the cause of the disease remains unknown, imagination fills the empty spaces. Some blame poisonous air rising from the earth. Others suspect distant stars or divine judgment. Fear grows because knowledge is absent. And in this atmosphere of uncertainty, the plague continues quietly spreading from one community to another. Imagine walking into a small farming village at dusk. The air feels unusually quiet. A few doors remain closed and smoke no longer rises from every chimney. Families who once worked together in the fields now stay indoors, hoping distance might protect them. The stars above look the same as they always have. But down here on the ground, life has begun to shift in ways no one fully understands. Dusk arrives gently across the countryside. The sun lowers behind distant hills, painting the sky with fading gold and soft violet clouds. Normally this hour brings a comforting rhythm to village life. Workers return from the fields. Children chase each other through narrow paths. The smell of cooking bread and stewed vegetables drifts from open doors. But tonight something feels different. As you walk along the narrow lane, you notice several houses remain dark. Their doors stay closed. No smoke curls from the chimney. In a small community, absences like this are immediately noticeable. Perhaps someone inside is sick. Perhaps an entire household has fallen silent. Neighbours pass quietly, avoiding eye contact with the shuttered buildings, not out of cruelty, but out of uncertainty. In the 14th century, people understand illness as something mysterious and unpredictable. Many believe proximity itself may bring danger, so families begin keeping to themselves more than before. Even friendships shift slightly. Visits grow shorter. Conversations happen at greater distance. Yet the natural world continues as if nothing has changed. You look up at the sky and see the same constellations people have watched for thousands of years. Stars shimmer with distant calm. The moon rises slowly above the trees. Nature, indifferent to human struggle, continues its ancient cycles. This contrast between cosmic stability and human fragility becomes deeply visible during times of plague. Above you, the universe remains vast and unchanged. Below, human communities tremble under forces they cannot see. A dog barks somewhere down the road, an owl calls from a nearby forest, and for a moment the village settles into an uneasy quiet. Inside one house, a family whispers prayers beside a sick relative. Inside another, people speak in hushed voices about whether they should leave town before the illness spreads further. But travel carries risks too. Rumours say the disease follows the roads. So many people choose to remain where they are, hoping the storm will pass. This quiet village under a darkening sky becomes a small reflection of what is happening across much of Europe. Thousands of communities face the same uncertainty, the same uneasy silence, and the same question lingering in the air like distant thunder. Will the sickness reach us next? In medieval Europe, Church bells mark the rhythm of daily life. They ring for prayer, for festivals, for weddings. But during the plague years, the bells begin ringing far more often. Each slow toll announces another death. Over time, the sound becomes so constant that it blends into the background of everyday life, like distant thunder that never quite moves away. You hear the bell before you see the church. A deep, resonant tone rolls across the rooftops of the town. In normal times, this sound is comforting. It calls people to prayer. It marks the passing of hours. It celebrates weddings and religious festivals. But during the years of the Black Death, the bell begins to carry a different meaning. Funerals. At first the change is subtle. The bell rings once, then twice in a single day, then perhaps 3 times. Each toll echoes through narrow streets and stone courtyards, announcing that another life has ended. You might watch townspeople pause when the bell sounds. Some bow their heads briefly. Others whisper a prayer. In a small community, nearly everyone knows the person who has died. But as the plague spreads, the pace of death increases. Soon the bell rings almost constantly. Morning, afternoon, night. The sound drifts across fields and forests like a slow, heavy heartbeat, marking the passing of lives. Priests struggle to keep up with the growing number of burials. Graveyards fill, ceremonies become shorter. Sometimes several bodies are buried together, and still the bell continues ringing. Over time, something strange happens. People begin growing accustomed to the sound. Human psychology adapts even to difficult circumstances. The bell becomes part of the background of daily life. Farmers continue working in the fields while the sound drifts faintly across the countryside. Market stalls reopen beneath its echo. Children still play in narrow streets. Life continues, even under the shadow of loss. Think about that for a moment. In the midst of one of history's most devastating pandemics, ordinary routines persist. People wake, they cook meals, they repair tools, they care for animals. The bell tolls quietly in the distance, and somehow the world keeps turning. You might be surprised by how people try to explain what is happening around them. Some blame bad air, believing poisonous vapors drift through towns at night. Others suspect divine punishment for humanity's sins. Without knowledge of bacteria or infection, the plague feels like a mystery written in a language no one can read. Standing in the 14th century, the idea of microscopic life simply does not exist. No one has seen bacteria. No one knows that tiny organisms can move from host to host through fleas or bodily fluids. Instead, people interpret disease through the frameworks available to them. One common belief involves miasma. Miasma theory suggests that illness spreads through corrupted air, vapours rising from rotting matter or stagnant environments. If the air smells unpleasant, it must also be dangerous. So people begin carrying fragrant herbs. They burn incense. They hold flowers near their noses while walking through crowded areas. The scents feel protective, and in some small ways these habits might even help by discouraging flea bites. But the real cause of plague remains hidden. Others look toward the heavens for answers. Medieval scholars often study astrology, believing planetary alignments influence events on Earth. Some reports claim that unusual configurations of stars caused poisonous winds to sweep across continents. Meanwhile, religious explanations grow stronger as well. Many believe the plague represents divine punishment for human sins. Communities gather for public prayers. Processions move slowly through streets as people beg for mercy and forgiveness. In times of crisis, the human mind naturally searches for meaning, and without scientific tools to investigate the true cause, imagination fills the silence. But here is the strange irony. Even though people misunderstand the plague's origins, many of their responses still reflect deep human instincts. They care for the sick. They pray together. They search for patterns that might protect their families. In other words, they do the best they can with the knowledge available. Centuries later, scientists will discover bacteria, fleas, and the biological mechanisms behind plague. But for the people living through the Black Death, the experience remains deeply mysterious, a puzzle written in invisible ink, and for now, the answers remain hidden, quietly waiting for future generations to uncover them. When physicians arrive, they bring knowledge shaped by ancient texts and limited science. Their treatments might include herbal mixtures, bloodletting, or burning fragrant herbs to cleanse the air. Some doctors eventually begin wearing long robes and strange masks filled with aromatic plants, believing the scents might protect them from poisonous air. You notice the doctor before he even reaches the sick house. In medieval towns, physicians are rare figures. Adults step aside quietly as the doctor passes, because wherever the plague doctor goes, suffering usually follows. Yet beneath the eerie mask is simply another human being, someone who breathes the same uncertain air as everyone else, someone who hopes the next patient might survive, and someone who understands, perhaps more than most, how little control anyone truly has over the forces shaping this moment in history. One of the most frightening features of the Black Death is the appearance of buboes. These swollen lymph nodes become painful and sometimes darken to almost black. People living through the epidemic quickly learn to recognize these signs. Seeing them on a loved one is like watching a storm cloud gather that cannot be pushed away. You first notice the swelling beneath the skin. It begins as a small lump, tender, warm to the touch. But over the next day or two, it grows rapidly. The body's lymph nodes are part of the immune system, acting as filters that trap infection. When bacteria enter the bloodstream, these nodes swell as they attempt to fight the invading organisms. During bubonic plague, this reaction becomes dramatic. The lymph nodes enlarge into painful masses called buboes. They usually appear in areas where lymph nodes are concentrated, the groin, the neck, and beneath the arms. To people living in the 14th century, these swellings seem deeply unnatural. The skin stretches tight around them. They darken in colour, sometimes turning deep purple or nearly black, and the pain can be intense. Even gentle movement causes discomfort. A person suffering from plague often lies still, overwhelmed by fever and weakness while the buboes grow larger. Neighbours quickly learn to recognise the signs. Once a swelling appears, the outcome often feels inevitable. In many cases, death follows within several days, yet not always. Modern studies suggest that a portion of infected people did survive, even without antibiotics. The human immune system can sometimes overcome the bacterium, especially if the infection remains localized. But in medieval communities watching the disease unfold, survival appears rare. So the appearance of buboes becomes a kind of dark signal, a visible mark that the mysterious illness has taken hold. Families gather around sick relatives, unsure what to do. Some apply poultices made from herbs, others pray. Others simply sit quietly beside the bed, offering comfort during the final hours. The swelling itself eventually softens. Sometimes it ruptures. Sometimes the body grows weaker until breathing slows and stops, and then the village bell rings again. From a modern scientific perspective, these buboes represent the battleground between bacteria and the immune system. Inside them, white blood cells struggle against multiplying plague bacteria. The swelling is the physical evidence of that invisible war. But for the people living through the epidemic, the buboes are simply the plague's dark signature, a sign written across the body itself, and once that sign appears, the future suddenly feels very uncertain. The plague rarely strikes just one person. Because families live closely together, illness spreads rapidly inside homes. Within days, an entire household can become sick. Sometimes no one survives to bury the dead. Neighbours eventually step in, performing the grim duty of carrying bodies away. Imagine entering a narrow street where several houses sit close together. The doors are made of heavy wood. Small windows allow thin streams of sunlight into dark interiors. Inside each home, families live in tight quarters. Parents, children, sometimes grandparents, occasionally animals as well. This closeness makes everyday life easier in many ways. Families share warmth during winter. Meals are prepared together. Work is divided among many hands. But during a contagious outbreak, closeness becomes dangerous. When one person in a household falls ill, others quickly follow. The fleas that carry plague bacteria can move easily between sleeping mats, clothing, and animals. Close contact also increases the chance of infection spreading through bodily fluids or respiratory droplets in certain forms of plague. Within days, several family members may develop fever. You might pass a house where no one has emerged for 2 days. Neighbours begin to worry. Finally, someone approaches the door cautiously. They knock, no answer. Eventually, the door is pushed open. Inside, the silence tells its own story. Sometimes everyone inside has already died. In other cases, one surviving family member lies too weak to move. Scenes like this become increasingly common during the worst years of the Black Death. The emotional weight on communities becomes enormous. Neighbours must step into roles they never expected. They carry bodies to burial pits. They care for orphaned children. They clean homes that suddenly stand empty. And through it all, the disease continues moving quietly from house to house. Yet even in these dark moments, human compassion remains visible. People risk exposure to help others. They bring water to the sick. They whisper prayers beside dying relatives. These acts of care may not stop the plague, but they reveal something deeply human. Even when fear spreads through a community, empathy survives alongside it. As deaths increase, traditional burial rituals become difficult to maintain. Graveyards fill quickly. In many towns, large pits are dug to hold dozens or even hundreds of bodies. Yet even in these dark moments, communities continue to gather, pray, and mourn in the only ways they know. At first, funerals follow familiar traditions. A body is washed carefully, clothed, placed in a simple wooden coffin or wrapped in cloth. Neighbours gather for prayers before burial in the churchyard. But as the plague spreads, the number of deaths begins to overwhelm these customs. Priests cannot perform ceremonies for every individual. Graveyards run out of space, and the living struggle to keep pace with the growing number of bodies. Eventually, towns begin digging large burial pits, deep trenches carved into the earth beyond the crowded churchyards. Bodies are carried there in carts or on wooden stretchers, several at a time, sometimes dozens. From a distance, these places appear strangely quiet. Workers move with solemn efficiency. Shovels scrape against soil. Prayers are whispered quickly before the graves are filled again. The atmosphere is heavy but strangely calm. Grief settles into the air like evening mist. Yet even during these grim tasks, people attempt to preserve dignity. They cross themselves. They speak blessings. They remember names whenever possible. Archaeological studies centuries later will uncover these burial sites, revealing just how widespread the tragedy became. Layers of skeletons resting together beneath the soil. Silent evidence of a time when death arrived faster than communities could manage. But standing here beside the quiet field, another truth becomes visible as well. Life does not stop completely. Fields still need tending, animals still require care, children still grow. Even during humanity's darkest moments, daily life continues in small, persistent ways. Seeds are planted, bread is baked, the sun rises again, and slowly, almost quietly, the world begins preparing itself for what comes next. While many people flee cities in search of safety, others remain behind. Priests continue visiting the sick. Family members care for loved ones despite the risk. Grave diggers and workers perform the difficult tasks necessary to keep towns functioning. Their courage often goes unnoticed in the larger story of the plague. If you stand quietly in a plague-stricken town, one truth slowly becomes clear. Not everyone runs, some people stay. At first this might seem surprising. When disease spreads quickly and unpredictably, the natural instinct is to escape, and many people do exactly that. Wealthier families sometimes leave crowded cities for countryside estates. Merchants close shops and travel toward regions that still seem untouched. Yet countless others remain where they are. Some stay because they have nowhere else to go. But many stay for another reason entirely: duty. You might notice a priest walking slowly along a narrow street, carrying a small lantern in the early evening. Inside a nearby house, someone is dying, and the family has asked for last rites. The priest knows the danger. He has seen the sickness before. Still, he enters the house. Inside, the air is warm with fever and quiet voices. The priest kneels beside the bed, offering prayers meant to guide the soul toward peace. These rituals carry enormous meaning in medieval life. For many families, the presence of a priest during death feels like a final act of care. Elsewhere, another kind of courage unfolds. Family members remain beside the sick. A mother places cool cloths on a child's forehead. A husband sits quietly next to his wife through the long hours of fever. A daughter brings water to a weakened parent. They know the risk. They understand the illness may soon touch them as well. Yet leaving loved ones alone feels unthinkable, and so they remain. There are also the workers whose responsibilities become unavoidable. Grave diggers, cart drivers, town officials, people tasked with carrying bodies to burial grounds or maintaining order during chaos. Their work is exhausting and emotionally heavy. Day after day they move through streets that grow quieter with each passing week. But without them, towns would collapse entirely. Food must still reach markets. Water must still be carried. Basic structures of life must continue. Historians sometimes overlook these individuals because their names rarely appear in written records. Yet their actions form a quiet backbone beneath the dramatic events of the Black Death. You might imagine the emotional strength required to perform such tasks, to wake each morning unsure what the day will bring, to walk through streets where sickness lingers, to continue helping others even when fear sits constantly in the back of your mind. And yet, human history is full of these quiet acts of courage. Moments when ordinary people step forward not because they feel brave, but because someone must. In the long story of the plague, these individuals rarely become famous, but their presence keeps communities functioning long enough for survival to remain possible. And in the darkest hours of the epidemic, that quiet persistence becomes a powerful force. Travel slowly begins to fade across Europe. Merchants avoid certain towns. Villages close their gates to strangers. Roads that once carried trade and conversation become strangely quiet. For the first time in centuries, parts of Europe feel isolated again. If you stand beside one of the great roads of medieval Europe, you might notice something unusual: the silence. Normally these roads carry constant movement. Merchant carts creak under heavy loads of grain or cloth. Pilgrims walk long distances towards sacred sites. Messengers ride between cities carrying letters and news. Animals shuffle slowly alongside travellers. Dust rises beneath the wheels. But during the worst waves of plague, the rhythm begins to slow, then slow again, until eventually the road becomes almost empty. The change happens gradually. At first, merchants begin avoiding towns known to be suffering from illness. A market rumoured to be infected suddenly attracts fewer visitors. Caravans alter their routes. Ships delay departure. Travellers hesitate before entering unfamiliar places. Soon entire villages begin closing their gates to outsiders. Strangers are greeted with suspicion. Where did you come from? Have you passed through an infected town? Are you sick? These questions echo across countless communities. It is an early form of quarantine, though the concept itself is not yet clearly defined. People simply understand that distance might help, so they begin creating distance wherever possible. The result is a continent slowly pulling inward. Trade networks weaken, communication slows. Regions that once felt closely connected begin to feel isolated again. You might walk for hours along a road that once bustled with travellers and see only a single distant figure. Perhaps a farmer returning from fields, perhaps a lone rider carrying urgent news. But the constant movement of medieval commerce fades into quiet. From a modern perspective, this shift makes sense. Reduced travel can slow the spread of disease, yet the economic consequences are profound. Markets shrink, supplies grow uncertain, cities dependent on trade begin struggling to feed their populations. But beneath these practical effects lies something deeper, a psychological transformation. Human societies depend heavily on connection, movement, exchange. When those connections disappear, the world feels suddenly larger and lonelier. Imagine standing on an empty road as evening approaches. The sky turns deep amber. Wind moves softly through tall grass beside the path, and the silence stretches farther than expected. In that quiet moment, you begin to understand how dramatically the plague is reshaping the world. Not only through illness and death, but through absence, through the spaces left behind when movement stops. For children born during the plague years, this strange new world becomes normal. They grow up hearing stories of sickness and survival. They learn early that life can change suddenly, yet they still play in fields, chase animals, and laugh beneath the same sun that warmed generations before them. If you watch carefully, you will notice something remarkable. Even in the midst of crisis, children continue being children. In a village touched by plague, adults carry heavy worries. They whisper about illness. They listen anxiously for the sound of church bells. They scan neighbours' faces for signs of fever. But children experience the world differently. A group of them runs through tall grass near the edge of a field. Their laughter carries on the wind. One chases a chicken that flutters clumsily away. Another balances along a fallen log beside a stream. For them, the world is still full of discovery. They do not yet fully understand the scale of the tragedy unfolding around them. Instead, they absorb fragments of conversation, stories told by parents, warnings not to wander too far, moments when adults suddenly grow quiet. In this way, children growing up during the Black Death develop a unique perspective on life. Loss becomes familiar early. A neighbor disappears, a relative dies. Yet childhood resilience allows moments of joy to persist alongside sorrow. You might see a child helping gather firewood with surprising seriousness, another learning to bake bread beside a parent. Responsibilities arrive earlier during difficult times. Families rely on every capable hand, and yet the natural curiosity of youth remains strong. A child kneels beside a puddle watching insects move across the water's surface. Another studies the clouds drifting overhead. The rhythms of nature continue offering small moments of wonder. Historians rarely record the voices of children directly. Most medieval documents were written by adults focused on political events, religious matters, or economic records. But indirectly we can see how young people experienced these years through the social changes that followed. Many children orphaned by the plague were raised by extended families or community members. Others inherited property unexpectedly after the deaths of older relatives. Entire generations grew up shaped by this period of uncertainty. Yet those same generations would later rebuild communities, farms, and cities. Think about that for a moment. The children running through fields during the plague years would eventually become the adults guiding Europe into a transformed future. Their memories of loss and survival would influence how they understood the fragile nature of human life. But standing here now, watching them chase one another through evening light, the future remains unwritten. For the moment, they're simply children, laughing beneath a sky that has witnessed countless generations before them. One of the most puzzling aspects of the Black Death is its unpredictability. Some towns lose most of their population, others experience fewer deaths. Even within the same household, one person might survive while another does not. To people living through it, the pattern feels almost random. You might expect a disease as devastating as the Black Death to behave in clear, predictable ways. But one of the most unsettling aspects of the plague is how unevenly it spreads. In one town, nearly half the population may die within months. In another town, only a short distance away, far fewer people fall ill. Even within the same family, outcomes can vary dramatically. A father becomes sick and dies within days. His daughter survives after weeks of fever. A neighbor remains healthy despite caring for several infected relatives. To people living through the epidemic, this unpredictability feels deeply mysterious. Why does one household suffer while another remains untouched? Why does the disease rage fiercely in one village and barely appear in the next? Modern science offers some explanations. Factors such as flea populations, rodent density, climate conditions, sanitation, and human movement patterns all influence how plague spreads. Even subtle environmental differences can change how quickly infected fleas move between hosts. Human immune responses also vary widely. Some individuals possess natural resistance that helps them survive infection. But none of these factors are visible to medieval communities watching the plague unfold. Instead, survival appears almost like a role of fate. People search desperately for patterns. Some believe certain herbs provide protection. Others claim particular prayers ward off illness. Stories circulate about lucky charms or protective rituals. And occasionally, someone who survives becomes a quiet symbol of hope. If one person can live through the sickness, perhaps others can as well. This uncertainty creates a strange emotional atmosphere. Fear exists everywhere, but so does cautious optimism, because every recovery suggests that the future might still hold possibilities. From the perspective of modern epidemiology, The Black Death was shaped by a complex combination of biological and environmental forces. Yet from the human perspective of the 14th century, the experience feels almost mystical. An invisible wave moving across the landscape, leaving some lives intact while sweeping others away. After the worst waves pass, something unexpected begins to happen. Fields still need tending, bread still needs baking. Slowly, people return to the routines of life. Markets reopen, though they feel quieter than before. The world continues, even after losing so many voices. Eventually, something begins to shift. The plague does not disappear instantly, but its grip loosens. Fewer people fall ill. The constant tolling of funeral bells grows less frequent. Days pass without new cases appearing in certain towns. At first, the change feels almost uncertain. People hesitate to believe the danger has truly faded. Yet practical needs soon push life forward again. Fields cannot remain untended forever. Seeds must be planted. Animals must be cared for. And slowly, people begin stepping back into their routines. You might arrive at a village market on a cool morning. The square is smaller than before. Several familiar faces are missing, but a few stalls have reopened. A farmer lays out vegetables grown in nearby fields. A baker places loaves of bread on a wooden table. A merchant displays cloth brought from another town that has also begun recovering. The conversations are quieter. There is a shared awareness of everything that has been lost. Yet beneath that sadness lies a quiet determination. Human societies possess a remarkable ability to rebuild, even after immense tragedy. Neighbours help repair abandoned homes. Fields once left empty are planted again. Children grow older. New families form. And slowly, the sounds of daily life return. Laughter, tools striking wood, animals moving through pastures. From a distance, the landscape may look almost unchanged, but the people living within it know how deeply the world has shifted. Entire communities have been reshaped. Population numbers have dropped dramatically. Economic structures are beginning to evolve. The plague has left a lasting imprint on the social fabric of Europe. Yet standing in this quiet marketplace, watching trade cautiously resume, one truth becomes clear. Life continues. Even after humanity's darkest chapters, the ordinary rhythms of existence find a way to return, and with them, the slow process of healing begins. As the night grows quieter around you, the world of the 14th century slowly begins to fade. The narrow streets grow still. The church bells fall silent. The distant glow of hearth fires softens into darkness. For a moment, imagine the countless lives that move through that fragile world. Farmers waking before dawn to tend fields beneath uncertain skies. Children chasing one another through tall grass beside village paths. Priests whispering prayers in candlelit rooms. Families gathering close together through long winter evenings. And then, the sudden arrival of something invisible, a bacterium so small that no one in that century could have imagined its existence, yet powerful enough to reshape continents, societies, and the quiet rhythms of everyday life. When you step back across the centuries, the story of the Black Death becomes more than a tale of loss. It becomes a reminder of how delicate human systems can be. Cities that once bustled with noise suddenly grew quiet. Trade routes fell still. Entire villages disappeared into history, leaving only faint traces beneath the soil. And yet, life continued. Fields were planted again. Markets reopened. Children grew into adults who rebuilt the world they had inherited. Human history moves forward in this strange way. Not as an unbroken line of triumph, but as a series of fragile recoveries. moments when people gather the pieces of their lives and begin again. Tonight, as you rest in the comfort of a very different century, you might notice how many things around you once seemed impossible to those living in the Middle Ages. Clean water flowing from a tap, medicine that understands the invisible world of bacteria, cities glowing with quiet electric light. These comforts are part of a long story shaped by centuries of hardship, discovery and resilience. So as you settle deeper into your own small moment in time, allow the medieval world to drift gently into the distance, the quiet villages, the candlelit rooms, the long roads stretching across fields beneath ancient stars. They belong to the past now. But the people who lived there, their fears, their hopes, their determination to continue, still echo faintly through history. And somewhere beneath the soil of those forgotten landscapes, the earth continues holding their stories, quietly, patiently, waiting for those willing to listen, even as sleep slowly carries you into the calm darkness of the present night.